Okay, so now we're going to move on to talk about California. So just after the 2007 to 2009 recession, I read this book, The $2 Trillion Meltdown. And at the time, the scale of the recession and the government response seemed like something I wouldn't experience again in my lifetime. But here we are. The CARES Act alone has pledged over $2 trillion in stimulus and aid. So this presentation is going to focus on two components of the stimulus: the Paycheck Protection Program and unemployment insurance extensions, with the focus on California. The idea is that as a first step to determining whether these programs worked, that is, what would have happened in their absence, this presentation is going to focus on what did happen by explaining program details and documenting outcomes. And then we will get to the forecast for the state. So let's start with the Paycheck Protection Program. This program was part of the CARES Act, and it allocated money for participating banks to make loans to small businesses. These loans would be forgiven if the borrowers used the money for certain approved expenses. Mostly you can think of this as payroll. So the idea is to try to keep individuals at their employer. And taking a step back, why does this kind of spending or why does this kind of program make sense right now? So as Ed mentioned, reforming employer-employee relationships will take a while and does take a while when they break. So if you can try to keep some of those relationships going, which is one of the goals of this program, that could in theory help speed a recovery. So now let's look at what's going on in California. This chart shows the cumulative number of approved loans to California applicants. So note that California applicants means that the company or entity listed California as their location in their PPP loan application. So initially, the CARES Act authorized about $350 billion, which ran out right about here. And then there was a second round of funding, about $310 billion, authorized in late April. So from the program start to the end on August 8th, California applicants were approved for over 600,000 loans with a total value of over $68 billion loans. That's the total monetary value of all the loans made. Now, this is the most by number, so number of loans, or by value than any other state. But keep in mind that California also has more payroll employment than any other state, and also more total annual wages than any other state. So by total annual wages, I mean, how much did all the California workers make in a given year? But even still, this is a lot of money coming in. So how can we start to think about whether this money worked? So one way to do that is to look at which industries received the most loans. If the program worked, you would expect that industries that were hit harder, like leisure and hospitality, other services, and construction, would get more help. And the data are roughly consistent with this idea. This chart shows the number of loans per 100 workers by industry in California. So you can see, for example, that other services and construction received relatively more loans per worker, as did professional and business services. Some subsectors here include business support at offices like administration, custodial, landscaping. Since fewer people are in offices, demand for these services has fallen off. And you can also see that transportation, warehousing, and utilities, which include subsectors like passenger air travel and passenger train travel and supporting roles, which Ed mentioned also. We can also look by county, and some patterns jump out. So this map shows you the number of PPP loans per 100 workers by each county in California. And darker colors mean that there are more loans per worker. So you can see that counties along the southern coast, around wine country, and around Lake Tahoe tended to receive more loans per worker. And counties in the center of the state, and to some extent the northern part of the state, received fewer. One story that's consistent with this pattern is that loans differentially went to counties that are typically thought of as having more tourism activity. And these would be hit harder by travel restrictions and social distancing requirements. So think about wine country and the South Coast around San Luis Obispo. But these patterns by industry and county are just that. They're patterns with stories and intuition. They can't give a precise answer to how well or whether the PPP program worked, but hopefully they begin to provide some supporting evidence. So this program was intended to keep people in their jobs, but a lot of people lost their job. So the CARES Act also provided support for the unemployed through extensions to unemployment insurance, or UI. The UI program is always around in expansions and recessions. It gives short-term monetary support to individuals who have lost their job. Now, the UI programs are run by states, so each state is going to be a little different. Everything I'm going to tell you today is California specific. Here I want to mention also that the California Policy Lab here at UCLA has been doing some outstanding timely work exploring the UI program in California, which has been immensely helpful in understanding the nuances of this program in the state. So here you're seeing a chart that shows continued claims for unemployment insurance since January of this year in California. So Jerry showed you a chart that had initial claims, which you can think of as capturing entry into the UI program, whereas continued claims capture the stock of people receiving UI. So they're slightly different measures. Now let's first focus on individuals who are usually eligible for UI. So in normal times, if you think of early part of this year as slightly more normal, there is regular state unemployment insurance, which is in the dark blue color in the graph. To be eligible, you have to be unemployed by no fault of your own. You have to have earned enough wages recently, and you have to be able and available to work, and you also have to be actively searching for work. You can receive benefits for 26 weeks, and your weekly benefit amount will range from $40 to $450, and this depends on how much you earned in your recent employment. So the more you earned, the larger your weekly benefit amount will be. So now there have been a couple of changes. One is that the work search requirement has been waived. The number of weeks available have increased to 59 weeks through the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program. These claims are in light blue in the graph, and also by extended benefits. These claims are in red or sort of burnt orange on the very upper right part of the graph. In addition, the amount of money claimants can receive has been increased. So there's an extra $600 supplement that was through July 31st, essentially to all claimants. And then an extra $300 supplement starting July 26th with some more restrictions. So it's expected that this extra $300 is going to be short-lived. In fact, I think the state is only authorized to make this extra payment through the end of August. So before I move on to some additional changes to this program, I just wanted to note kind of the dramatic increase in regular state unemployment insurance claims, sort of continued claims, sorry. So in normal times, a weekly number that's kind of normal is in the 300,000 ballpark. Right now, or I should say in early September on the 5th, there were about 2.7 million continued claims. So that's a pretty substantial increase. So now let's talk about individuals who are not usually eligible for UI. In normal times, because they're not usually eligible, we have 0 weeks and $0. But right now we have something called the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, or PUA. As a side note, these claims are not shown on this chart, but individuals who are eligible through this program are those who are not eligible for regular state because they don't have enough work history, perhaps they're self-employed or they're an independent contractor, and they are also unemployed for a reason related to the coronavirus. With the PUA program, these individuals can get 46 weeks of support, and payment amounts range from $167 to $450, and also have the extra $600 and $300 supplement that I mentioned before. So briefly, having explained these extensions to UI. Why does this make sense from a policy perspective? Why does extending UI in bad times, what's the idea behind how this will be helpful? Well, one idea is that UI payments help smooth consumption and prevent a downward spiral from individuals not having enough money for things like rent and utilities and groceries. In bad economic times, there are relatively more people looking for work, so it's harder to find a job, and individuals might be unemployed for longer and need more generous insurance. So now let's transition to the forecast. I talked about two new or expanded programs, the PPP and unemployment insurance. So how does this help us with the outlook? Well, the UI data help us understand labor markets in the state. UI program use in California seems to be flat or rising, while elsewhere in the US, program use is trending down. Also, California has one of the highest insured unemployment rates of all states. This is a measure that captures the number of people who are claiming UI relative to the number of people who could potentially claim UI, so those that are eligible. This could be a drag on the economy. The PPP loan information largely corroborate our understanding and our intuitions, but they don't tell the whole story. We know, for example, that leisure and hospitality was hit hard. So this plot shows you international airport arrivals at SFO and LAX. You can see that international tourism is still way down. Logistics, if you measure it by imports and exports at California ports, which is what you're seeing here, fell in the March timeframe, look to have recovered, but it's unclear how much of the rebound is the volatility that we see in the series, how much is restocking of inventories, and how much is true recovery in a sense. As Jerry mentioned, housing is a bright spot. Here's one instance where we do see a pretty pronounced V. My apologies to Ed. Sales of single-family homes in California are back up to their pre-recession levels. So we can put this all together by looking at employment by industry. This chart shows you employment by industry in California at 3 points in time, April, August, and our forecast for Q4 2022, all relative to February 2020, which is that dashed line at 1. So you can see that some industries get back by the end of their forecast, by the end of the forecast period. So those are the ones on the right side of the chart. You can compare the light blue bars to the black dashed line, but many don't. And even though the bars look pretty close to the dashed line, it still represents a substantial amount of jobs that haven't come back. So if you look at construction, for example, we are forecasting that construction will get almost 97% of the way back by Q4 2022, but that's still a loss of, or a difference of almost 30,000 jobs. So now to the forecast. This chart shows you our quarterly forecast for payroll employment and the unemployment rate in the state. So let's first focus on the blue bars. Payroll employment was just over 17.5 million at the end of 2019. And our forecast is for payroll employment to get 97% of the way back by the end of 2022. The yellow line, which is unemployment rate, in California will generally follow the same pattern as in the US, but will be a little bit higher than that number in the US through the recovery, ending 2022 just under 6%. So these are annual averages of the charts I just showed you, but let me quickly talk about housing. We expect housing to recover quickly with building permits just about 127,000 in 2022. So I just want to make a quick comment that those assumptions that Jerry talked about, the pandemic sort of induced shutdowns dissipating in 2021 and a stimulus package at the end of this year also underlie the California forecast. And if we're too optimistic there, then so is this forecast. With that, I will turn it back to Jerry.